You remember that last week we covered chapter 1 last week. So if I scroll across, that's the introduction. Chapter 1, preface, there we go. So chapter 1 was Congo cosmology in graphics. And you recall how this chapter kind of focused on the cosmology, so the book is called The African Cosmology of the Bantu-Kongo, Principles for Life and Living. And obviously so he lays out the cosmology, i.e. he lays out the Bakongo conception of how the universe came into being. We read a lot of things with regard to different types of planets. So if I scroll through, you'll maybe see, talked about basically the Bakongo's understanding of what you might call the Big Bang Theory. Sorry, let me remove this. Oh, hang on, sorry, how do I remove that? There we go, hide that, there we go, bosh. Yeah, it talked about the Bakongo understanding of the Big Bang, how the universe, was really hot, and then it sort of expanded, and then it talks about all the different types of planets. One of the interesting things that he talks about was how there are 3 different types of planets. Green planets like Earth, which is the breathing planets, the eldest planets, the older planets. Each solar system, he suggests, has one or more of those, Earth being the one for this solar system. Then he talked about gray planets, which are those planets which are without life yet, but they will eventually have life. And then the red hot planets, which are the ones which are actually not yet fully formed planets. So that was all very good. Then he started to kind of bring the cosmology down to the level of humans, people, and how there are different elements of being in the Bakongo understanding of, I suppose, what would you call that? Anthropology, the Bakongo anthropology, if you want to call it, or Bakongo social cosmology. I don't know if that's the right word, but we talked through these. I stumbled along very difficultly through all these Kikongo terms, which now you'll be able to see them on screen, and you'll see why I struggle to get through some of these ones. But one of the things that stood out for me was this one here, where he talks with regard to people entering into this sphere. You see that top image there with the person, the figure standing in that V. He says that space, I kind of understand it as a kind of a social elevation. You get to this level of elevation where you become a leader. It's a leadership space, and or a master, and you're called an nganga, as he said there. And he suggested that the Ankh symbol from the people of Kemet, that's what that Ankh symbol represents, which is someone who is kind of sitting in that space, standing in that space of leadership. So yeah, so we went through various of these things, and then toward the end, the ancestor Bunseki Fu-Kiau started to talk about this one here, we should talk about this. We covered this when we read Kindezi, where Fu-Kiau talked about how every single human being is a living sun, S-U-N, and we rise, we're at the highest point in our sort of middle age or whatever, and then toward the end of life, we're at our lowest point. But that whole rising and setting is part of a circular life cycle that we all have, this reincarnation-based understanding of life, which that line, the horizontal line there, is the line that divides the diurnal world. So you've got below the line is the spiritual existence, and above the line is the physical existence. If you want to differentiate those two things, although there's probably an argument to say that spiritual doesn't necessarily mean not physical, but anyway. So he talked. Bunseki Fu-Kiau talked about how we go through this cycle over and over and over again. So those of us now who are here watching this stream, we are above the circle there, going through that part of this phase of our particular existence. When this phase ends, i.e. when we die, we shall go below the circle there, which is the spiritual. We'll become ancestors, but then we'll come back again, and so on and so on and so forth. So that was all good. Then he finished the chapter by talking about marriage. and how repeating many of the themes which we've read in many other books, like Oyewumi's The Invention of Women. We read it in Kindezi, his own Kindezi. We read it in The Spirit of Intimacy by Sobonfu Some. And this, this is clearly something that is pretty widespread, pretty common amongst us as modern African people. You know why? Because we share the same roots. So our philosophies are very similar in many ways. One of them being that marriage is not an individualized thing. Marriage is actually a concert or a combination of at least two communities, two tribes, two nations, if you like. So that was all good. And then, as he said, right at the end of that chapter there on page 42, he said, this last concept, well, he says that the reason why he's gone through all of this stuff to do with the cosmology and understanding of what people are, what is man and all that sort of stuff, the reason is that he thinks it will now be able it will enable us to be able to make better sense of what he's going to talk about in the next chapter, which is, as he says there, right, last sentence there, he says, I now invite you to read that African aspect of law and crime, even though it is not done by a specialist in legal matters. And that, my friends, is what we're going to go and do now. So make sure that you like the video, please, if you haven't already. Do share the video as well and make a much more of a conscious effort to ask the I, them to share, because sharing is caring, as I'm always telling watoto wangu, my children. Sharing is caring. So the more of you, each one who's watching here, if you share it with your YouTube, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it might be. Instagram is a bit harder to do, but if you share it with your networks, you will at least reach a few other people. So we've got 5 of us on the stream now. If each of you does that, we could maybe get it up to like 25. So let's keep doing that. And I would encourage you, please, as well, to get yourself settled down, get something to drink. Let's get into this. So chapter 2, the African concept of law and crime. This chapter is a short chapter. It's only 10 pages, so I presume we'll be able to get through it quite quickly, but let's do this. This study on the African concept of law and crime is based on the Bantu people who live in the center of West Africa, specifically the Bantu-Kongo. In this analysis, I would like to emphasize the traditional concepts of law and crime still practiced by the Bantu-Kongo people and their neighbors, rather than what has been recorded by some European travelers. These Europeans wrote about the culture of the people of this area, including the Bantu-Kongo, without knowing even superficially any African language, man's most important instrument of cultural communication and of social learning patterns and behavior. This is a very important point to bear in mind when you don't restrict yourself, don't limit yourself to published academic research, particularly published academic research that has been done by non-African people. Because for one thing, like Fu-Kiau said there, these people often don't understand the language. This is a point that Oyewumi makes very forcefully, and on an extent, the whole book is basically, her book, The Invention of Women, is basically all about how people come to cultures, specifically African cultures in her case, but all cultures, without understanding the language of that culture, without understanding thus that culture. Because if you don't understand the language of a culture, your understanding of that particular culture, that people, is going to be extremely limited, and you are likely to distort things that you come across. And then also as well, there's a whole fact that academia has all of its motivations, all of its kind of ways of working, ways of operating, ways in which certain subjects are written about, certain subjects are not written about, the peer review process, gatekeeping, the journals themselves are gatekeepers and all that, the publishers are gatekeepers. What we read in these books and papers is going to be a tiny fraction of what's even been written about, what's even been, what has actually been studied. So that's just an important point there, which Bunseki Fu-Kiau is saying, is that he's actually he's reporting on what is actually being still practiced by the Congo people, the Bakongo people, as well as some of their neighbors. And that's an important point, because sometimes when I talk about African culture, traditional African philosophy and this sort of stuff. Sometimes I keep saying things like, oh, it used to be like this, traditional used to be, it's not anymore. But, you know, there are many things which are being practiced, and, you know, Fu-Kiau is going to focus on those. So he continues, one of the most crucial African problems, which leads to anarchy within many African governments today, and therefore cannot be neglected, is the African people's total ignorance of their own traditional concept of law and crime. Okay, this ignorance confronts many modern African leaders with a dilemma, a certain impossibility of choice. Because they do not have a full understanding of either Western or African patterns of law, they cannot totally opt for either system. Oh, I'm gonna have to remove this thing, aren't I? Because I can't see the, just bear with us for a second. I can't see the, how'd you get rid of this? Oh, good, yeah, it's gone. So with the adoption of the imported legal systems by new African nations, everything since then has turned upside down. Considering what one sees and lives in today's Africa, colonial atrocities are not anymore viewed as such. For many outsiders who have witnessed African humanism and its strong, wonderful neighborhood among people, verbally and documentary, these outsiders tell us that Africa, in many of its parts, is in the wrong hands of quote unquote foolish leaders. African leaders, with few exceptions, are considered foolish men. Bimpumbulu lauki ye mbundumbun ndum ye mianisi. I'm not going to read the Kikongo words. Because they act out, and just with all respect, you know, let me out of respect to my Congo brothers and sisters, I'm gonna, you know, I haven't practiced enough to be able to pronounce these words freely. So let me not try to think, but you can read it there yourselves. And shout out to any Congo watching this. So these leaders, with few exceptions, are considered foolish men because they act outside of African traditional legal aspects of leadership. African people themselves agree that the great majority of their political leaders are good for nothing. Wow. These leaders could have been excellent governors during the colonial epoch to serve their masters sufficiently. But by and large, we should recognize one competence. They are very successful about the matter of competition around, oh my God. They are very successful around the matter of competition around colleagues, ladies, a competition that gave birth to what is known in certain African countries as second bureauism. The key to most antagonism in today's Africa, antagonisms which are not very often political or ideological. Lord have mercy. He's basically saying that these politicians are basically fighting over each other's wives. So then he defines this second bureauism as secret polygamy of elites and bourgeois in certain African countries. A second bureau is, in those countries, not a second office, but a lady very often officially hired by a governmental or an administrative authority, not necessarily to play a governmental role in public life, but in the eyes of the hiring side to serve as a means by which the authority intends to accomplish certain of its secret plans and intentions against certain individuals it considers as its foes. Okay, wow. I did not see this coming, I must say, from this chapter. And it's interesting because in the preface, is it the preface? I think it's in the preface of the book or the blurb on the back or something that we read last week. Do you remember that there was the blurb was saying that, oh yeah, Bunseki Fu-Kiau, you know, he became an advisor or something to Mobutu, the dictator of Congo. So I must find out when this book was written to see if you know, who he might have had in mind when he was talking about these things.